BYD just released a brand new electric car for less than $10,000, the kind of number that makes you assume something is missing until you see what's actually inside. Not a golf cart with doors, not a compliance car built to chase a subsidy, a 5-seat, crash-rated, 250-mile production EV for less than a lot of people pay for a used gas car with 100,000 miles already on it. Meanwhile, the cheapest EV worth buying anywhere else in the world still starts around $40,000. How is that even possible? In this video, we're breaking down exactly how BYD builds a car this cheap, and the honest answer has almost nothing to do with lower quality. It comes down to how the batteries get made, how the factories are run, how the supply chain is controlled, and how tightly all of it is stitched together inside one company. This isn't really a story about one car. It's a different blueprint for building a car in the first place. And once you see that blueprint, the rest of the industry starts to look a little different. The easy answer is the one most people jump to. It must be cheaper materials. It must be cutting corners somewhere you can't see. Thinner steel, weaker batteries, a car built to fall apart right after the warranty runs out. It's a fair instinct. For decades, cheap and corner cut really did travel together in this industry, and plenty of low-cost cars earned that reputation honestly. That answer is comfortable because it means nothing has to change anywhere else. Detroit keeps doing what Detroit does, Europe keeps doing what Europe does, and the cheap car stays a Chinese curiosity, a bit of a punchline. The real answer is less comfortable because it isn't about what BYD left out. It's about what almost every other car company still pays someone else to do, that BYD just does itself from the ground up. To understand this, you have to go back to what BYD actually was before it ever built a car. In 1995, a chemist named Wang Chuanfu borrowed the equivalent of about $300,000 from a cousin and started a battery company in Shenzhen. Not a car company, a battery company, competing against Japanese giants like Sony and Sanyo for the booming mobile phone market. Wang wasn't a businessman by training. He studied metallurgy for his undergraduate degree, then powder metallurgy for his master's at a Beijing research institute, and BYD's early edge wasn't some secret formula. It was labor-intensive, hands-on manufacturing that undercut the fully automated Japanese factories on cost, using China's scale of skilled labor as the advantage instead of robots. That single decision, made almost 30 years ago by a chemist, not a car guy, is the root of everything that happens next. BYD didn't get into cars until 2003, when Wang bought a failing state-owned automaker almost as an afterthought. But he brought the battery obsession with him, and by his own account, he still spends the majority of his working time on engineering, not boardrooms. In 2020, that obsession produced something called the Blade battery. Most EV batteries use nickel and cobalt-heavy chemistry, expensive materials bundled into individual modules, then packed into the car. BYD's Blade battery does something different. It uses lithium iron phosphate instead of nickel and cobalt, and it skips the module step entirely, laying long, flat cells directly into the pack like books on a shelf. That one change cuts the number of structural components by around 40%, and independent research out of RWTH Aachen University in Germany puts the resulting cost around $11 cheaper per kilowatt hour than Tesla's own battery chemistry. Multiply that across a battery pack, and you start to see where a real chunk of that price gap comes from. It's not just cheaper, either. BYD demonstrated the Blade battery safety with two stunts that became famous in the industry: driving a nail straight through a fully charged cell on camera and parking a 46-ton loaded truck directly on top of a battery pack. A conventional high-density battery in either of those tests can catch fire or explode. The Blade battery just sat there, warm to the touch at most, and sprang back into shape once the truck rolled off. Wang Chuanfu said at the time that his goal was to remove the words spontaneous combustion from the vocabulary of electric cars entirely. BYD now holds several hundred patents tied to that one design through a dedicated in-house subsidiary called FinDreams Battery, and the second-generation version now charges from empty to full in around 11 minutes. Here's the detail that should really make you pay attention. Tesla, the company every other EV maker is still measured against, has reportedly started using BYD's own battery cells in some of its standard range vehicles. The company most associated with electric cars in the West is quietly buying batteries from the company most people in the West have never heard of. It's also worth knowing that Western investors clocked this early, even if the general public didn't. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway bought roughly 10% of BYD back in 2008 on the recommendation of his late business partner Charlie Munger, who later said flatly that BYD was so far ahead of Tesla inside China that the gap was almost ridiculous. Berkshire didn't fully cash out of that position until 2025, 17 years later, for a gain in the billions. And Wang himself has never pretended this was about inventing something out of thin air. He said openly that the vast majority of what BYD builds comes from studying existing research and patents closely and improving on it in small deliberate steps, not from some flash of pure originality. That's not a knock on the company. It's arguably the entire playbook, less about a single genius breakthrough, more about relentless, unglamorous engineering applied at a scale nobody else was willing to match. A cheap battery only gets you so far if you can't build the car around it fast enough to matter. This is where BYD's scale stops being impressive and starts being almost hard to believe. At BYD's largest factory in Xi'an, the line moves fast enough to finish a car roughly every 20 seconds during a peak production, somewhere around 4,400 vehicles a day out of that one site alone. That single factory built over 1 million cars in 2024. BYD runs 9 of these production bases across China, and together in 2024, they turned out more than 4.2 million vehicles, a jump of over 40% from the year before. For scale, Tesla's own largest single factory in Shanghai is built to produce under 1 million vehicles a year. BYD is running the equivalent of 4 Shanghai gigafactories at once inside China alone. By 2025, the math caught up with the headlines. BYD sold 2.26 million fully electric vehicles that year, overtaking Tesla's 1.64 million to become the world's largest seller of pure battery electric cars for the first time ever. Tesla isn't standing still, to be fair. Deliveries climbed back up past 480,000 in a single quarter in 2026 as its refreshed Model Y ramped up. But the fact that this is even a real contest, that a company most Western car buyers can't name is trading blows with Tesla for the global EV crown, tells you everything about how fast this shifted. BYD is even opening factories on Tesla's own turf now, with a new plant in Camaçari, Brazil, building the Sea Lion 6. And BYD's tiny Dolphin Mini has been outselling every other EV in Brazil's retail market for months running. Manufacturing at that pace and that price isn't an accident of cheap labor, and it isn't the result of skimping on engineering to hit a number either. BYD plows more than 10% of its revenue back into research and development every year, a higher share than most legacy automakers manage even in good years. What that pace actually reflects is a company controlling every stage of the process closely enough to squeeze inefficiency out at every single step, then reinvesting what it saves right back into the next generation of the same battery and the same factories. Which brings us to the part of this story most people never think about: what happens when the chips run out. In 2021, a global semiconductor shortage brought car production almost to a halt worldwide. Ford, GM, Toyota, almost everyone idled factories for months because they couldn't get the chips their cars needed to run everything from power steering to infotainment. BYD barely blinked. Why? Because BYD makes its own semiconductors through a dedicated division that now operates as its own listed subsidiary. It had already been producing chips for its electronics and battery business for years, so when the rest of the industry went hunting for parts on a shortage-driven black market, BYD simply kept its own lines running. That single advantage is a preview of BYD's whole approach to supply chains. Don't just buy the parts, own the part of the chain that makes them, so a crisis somewhere else in the world can't stop your factory. The chip division alone has grown large enough that it now operates as its own separate, publicly listed company, selling semiconductors to other manufacturers, as well as building them into BYD's own cars. A battery company that became a chip company that became a car company in that order over 3 decades. That philosophy is now taking BYD physically outside China for the first time at real scale. Overseas sales passed 1 million units in 2025, up 150% in a single year, and BYD is now building that factory in Camaçari, Brazil, aimed at an eventual 600,000 vehicles a year, which would make it the largest EV plant anywhere in Latin America, built specifically so cars for that market don't have to cross an ocean at all. Every one of those overseas factories exists for a simple, unglamorous reason. Building the car closer to where it's sold is cheaper than shipping a finished one across an ocean and paying the import tariffs on the other end. BYD is running the same play in Europe, with a factory in Szeged, Hungary that began trial production in early 2026, aimed at up to 300,000 vehicles a year, specifically to sidestep the tariffs the EU placed on cars built in China. Not every expansion move lands on schedule. A similar plant planned for Turkey has stalled before construction even really started, and Turkish officials have since pulled the tax breaks they'd promised BYD over it. Even a company built around control over every step of its own chain still runs into the one thing it can't fully own: another country's politics. So put all of it together: the battery, the motor, the chips, the software, the factories, even the ships that move the cars, largely built, owned, or run by the same company. Tesla does plenty of this too, to be fair. Building its own battery packs and writing its own software has always been part of Elon Musk's playbook, and it's a real reason Tesla got as far ahead as it did. But BYD pushed the same idea further and into more corners at once. Its own battery chemistry from scratch, its own semiconductors, its own motors, all under one roof, at a scale no Western automaker has matched. That's not a corner being cut. That's a corner nobody else finished building. And the same integration that makes the $10,000 car possible also scales upward. BYD's flagship sedan, running a larger version of that same blade battery, covers over 375 miles on a single charge, further than most premium EVs, from brands charging 2 or 3 times the price. It's the same battery architecture, the same factories, the same supply chain, just tuned for a different price point. One integrated system stretched across an entire lineup. And it's the real answer to the number that started this video. That $10,000 car, the Seagull, isn't cheap because it's poorly made. It's cheap because every layer of margin that usually stacks up to make a car expensive, the battery supplier's cut, the chip broker's cut, the shipping company's cut, has simply been deleted, folded into one company's own operation instead of paid out to 5 different vendors along the way. If you're wondering why you've never seen one on a road near you, it's not because it wouldn't sell. Import tariffs alone would push that same car's price in the US past $26,000 before it ever reached the dealer lot. Still cheaper than most EVs sold here, but no longer the jaw-dropping number it is at home. None of this makes BYD unbeatable. And it doesn't mean every part of the industry has to build cars exactly this way to survive. It doesn't erase real questions people ask about quality control, or how sustainable this pace of expansion actually is, or what happens when a factory deal runs into a government that says no. But it does mean the old assumption that cheap has to mean lesser doesn't hold up here. It just meant nobody else had rebuilt the entire chain from the ground up to make it not true. And one orphaned chemist from one of China's poorest provinces decided to spend 30 years doing exactly that, one factory and one battery patent at a time. Once you see how deep that integration actually goes, every other car on the lot starts to look a little different, like it's carrying costs it didn't have to, paid out to suppliers most drivers will never know existed, baked into a sticker price nobody ever questions. If you want to keep seeing how things actually get built, not just what they're sold as, subscribe. There's a lot more of this industry that doesn't look the way you'd expect.